Well, I think we'll get started, and thank you all for coming. Sorry about the hang-up down in the lobby. I don't think they respect such a large crowd. People can't work a little more expedited methodology. But I think the building is adding a little extra security this particular period. I mean, they're closing the building on the 20th, for example, on inauguration. May be part of that. Anyway, welcome. My name is Mark Fritzler. I'm the director of the TOPS program, and TOPS and Stakeholder would be pleased to welcome you to this consultation with Food for Peace. We're a couple of just sort of administrative points I'd like to mention. For those of you who might need the restroom, they're out in the elevator lobby, so you need to go out. Where's the microphone? Let me get near a microphone.
Speak up. There's a lot of them around.
Okay. And then, so if you need to go use the restrooms, just go out through the entrance there and go down through to the elevator lobby there. There's for those who might need water, there's the kitchen just down the hall as you go out here, just go down the hall. It'll be on the right. There's a kitchen there, so you can get some water if you need it. Anyway, welcome. I'm supposed to be giving you a warm TOPS welcome, and on a day like today, I guess that's probably very helpful. It has been rather chilly. Anyway, we're on a little bit of a tight schedule, so just a couple of points. The purpose of this consultation is to clarify the RFA and the country-specific information. Procurement-sensitive questions won't be answered, so don't try. This consultation is also being recorded, and it will be posted on the TOPS FSN network website after it's completed, so you'll be able to access that if you want to follow up on any of the points that were raised there. And, I know many of you might like to try to follow some of our Food for Peace colleagues down the hall and ask one last question. Well, you can't do that, sorry. The questions, when the question period ends here, the questions are finished. You can't be asking questions privately out in the elevator lobby or something like that. They won't answer you, for one thing. So we're asking that you play by the rules of the game. This is procurement-sensitive stuff, so I'm sure you all have been through this many, many times before. So anyway, I'd like to pass this on over to Susan Bradley and Michael Keegan and the rest to carry this forward, and good luck.
So I'm just going to say a couple of things and then turn it over to Michael. One is, again, just to repeat, thank you all for coming out. It is nasty out there. I just wanted to turn around and go right back to myself. And then Bridget says, oh, no, we're going on the metro, and it's a 10-minute walk. Anyway, it was fun. In addition to the people you see up here, and we'll each be doing a couple of words, broad brush thoughts about the RFA, the CSIs, their relation to the strategy, and sort of key things that we hope are clear in the documents, but that we can sort of reinforce. There are a number of Food for Peace people in the audience, and we are going to feel free to pass questions to them if we can't answer them. So we will punt when we can. But again, once we leave this room, that we have to then be quiet, because the whole point of this is that everybody is hearing the same thing. And it's a very exciting thing for us. I was talking to Julie on the way up, and it's the first time we've actually been able to pull a consultation around the RFA and CSI together. So it's our first time. I guess it's your first time with us, although USDA does this on a regular basis. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Michael.
So I'm Michael Keegan. I'm the acting grant team leader for Food for Peace, and I don't really have that much to say. I want to get us into the meat of the presentation, but just thought maybe we could go and briefly do introductions of those at the table and then go from there.
Hi, everyone. My name is Grace Anna Enzier. I'm the Country Backstop Officer for Uganda.
And you've met me.
Hi, good morning. My name is Arif Rashid. I lead the monitoring and evaluation team in Food for Peace.
And my name is Beth Duriak, and I'm a grants management specialist.
Other than that, I mean, I think we'll go through our presentations, focusing first on the CSI and then the various aspects of the RFA. I think you'll find a great deal of the RFA is similar to last year, but there have been some changes, and so after this session, we will be clarifying as well, and as we did last year, we will post a summary of the major changes to the RFA when the final RFA is released. Turn it over to Kristen.
Great. So thanks everyone again for coming. I'm going to speak briefly about both of the CSIs. recognizing that they are two distinct CSIs for Uganda. I wanted to point out that there are a fair number of documents that are listed in both of the CSIs as forthcoming, and when you Google them, you might not be able to find them, and we recognize that. Specifically the mission CDCS, the desk reviews, the Bellman, they'll all be finalized prior to the finalization of the RFA and CSI. First, I'm going to talk about the graduation pilot. Food for Peace is very excited to be piloting the graduation approach. It's been implemented in various countries throughout the world with good results and sustainable results. So we're extremely excited to pilot it. We recognize that it's a new investment for Food for Peace, particularly as a development activity focusing on refugees and host communities. It's not a new approach, but it is a pilot for Food for Peace, which is why it's a longer activity for the 7-year time period. It's a modified, refine, and implement activity, with the first year being dedicated to targeting, analysis, and activity startup. It's more prescriptive than the Karamoja CSI, we recognize that, and that's because of the graduation approach being tested throughout the world already. We anticipate partners to follow the traditional graduation approach. However, because there's research angles of this, there will be some peeling back of the graduation approach. By applying for the graduation pilot CSI, you're agreeing to partner with research institutions of USAID's choice that we're still working on identifying.
Sorry, just when you're speaking, is it possible for you to step over a little bit, kind of where Mark was standing? I'm sorry about that. People are having. That's the microphone right there.
Lauren, could we put this up then so it's not so awkward? You could leave those. We can shift this down, especially if we do that. Sorry.
Yeah. We're refining right now. Okay, so right, so you're agreeing to work with research institutions of thanks. USAID's choice. Because we're going to be implementing up to 2 randomized control trials, the research institutions will be implementing the randomized control trials. So the RCTs will have 2 cohorts. The first cohort will be a control group, which will then transfer into the second cohort during the second round of implementation. A traditional standard graduation approach cohort, and then up to 2 cost-effective approaches that are peeling back the graduation approach. And that's for the applicants to propose what the peeling back would look like. And then you, based on the research that's found from the first cohort, then you'll implement the second cohort with some of the peel back models, depending on what the information's found and what it shows on what the best way to move forward. So at the midterm, there will be a break in order for the research institutions to show what they're finding, and then have an opportunity for questions and decisions to be made about what the second treatment arm looks like. The activity falls squarely under Government of Uganda and UN bodies' REHOPE agenda, as well as the Settlement Transformative agenda. And as such, we anticipate the activity feeding up into both of the strategies, and close collaboration with the UN agencies working with the refugees and host communities, as well as close collaboration with the district local governments, and close collaboration with the Office of Prime Minister under the Government of Uganda. As I mentioned earlier, while the CBCS is not yet posted, this activity does fall squarely under the mission CBCS, as well as the mission Collaborating, Learning, and Adapting agenda, which is a big priority for the mission. It has been for quite some time, and it continues to be under the new CBCS. So those are the key points for the graduation pilot CSI, and I'll talk about the Karamoja one. The Karamoja CSI is much less prescriptive than the graduation pilot CSI. We really are encouraging applicants to be creative in what you're proposing, and we're not telling you what to do. We want you to tell us what you plan to do. It's not a refine and implement activity, so it's more of a traditional Food for Peace activity. However, it is funded with community development funds, CDF resources. So as such, you can be very creative. If resource transfers are being proposed, you can be creative about what you're thinking of doing. So it can be local and regional procurement of commodities. It can be cash transfers. It can be vouchers. There doesn't have to be a resource transfer. It's really up for the applicants to propose what you're thinking of for the Karamoja activities. There are 4 thematic areas. It's community-level governance, addressing chronic malnutrition, addressing WASH, and addressing sustainable livelihoods. These 4 areas have to be addressed in the proposal. However, you do not have to address all of the challenges and opportunities that we've laid out. We encourage applicants, when you're doing your research, you're identifying other challenges or other opportunities that we did not mention, we encourage you to address those. So please feel free to be creative in the application. Again, we are expecting close collaboration and coordination with local district governments. There are plenty of actors in the Karamoja subregion currently, and we expect collaboration where appropriate throughout those activities as well. We also anticipate USAID Uganda having additional activities there potentially in the future, and we would hope for collaboration with other U.S. government investments in the region as well. And again, it's falling under the mission CDCS and the mission's Collaborating, Learning, and Adapting agenda. So we encourage learning throughout the activities timeline. And those are the main points for both of the CSIs.
And we'll do questions at the end after everyone spoke so that someone later doesn't cover something that you have a question on. So just write them down. Thanks.
So I am going to be talking a little bit of the strategy, but before I do that, I want to emphasize the last point that Grace Anna made. The Uganda mission probably has certainly one of the, if not the strongest CLA agenda of all USAID missions. It is very, very impressive, and they expect partners to be fully contributory, if you will, to the process. So it comes with some good stuff and bad stuff too. They're going to be in your knickers, and that's just the nature of the game in Uganda. The graduation pilot, as Grace Anna explained, is a departure for us in 2 ways. One is that it is very seriously prescriptive in some basic, in the basic structure of the program. At the same time, it's challenging partners to say, okay, given this pretty rigid structure, what are the changes we have to make given the context that we're going to be implementing? The other thing I think it challenges both you guys and us is to think about what the value added is of working in communities where you have your refugee populations, your non-refugee populations, what could be perceived as inequitable services and access to services. So we're hoping to be learning quite a bit about the value added of taking this sort of a joint approach, refugee, non-refugee, working in the same space. All right, with that, I'll emphasize just a couple of things because I know you all sleep with a copy of the strategy under your pillow. You guys were such contributors to it. It would be a shame if you aren't sort of familiarizing yourself with it. In one of our meetings, I think I was asked about an implementation plan for the strategy, and right now the biggest part of implementation, or sort of most obvious part of an implementation plan, is the procurement that we're designing. And hopefully when you read the RFA and when you've read the CSIs, you'll see us trying to deliberately reach back to the strategy, pull in what we see are sort of the obvious places where really thinking about some of these key issues will hopefully help design more sustainable and more impactful programs. I want to mention a couple for the Karamoja procurement. I think the most obvious, just kind of hits you right in the head, is the governance issue, is tackling what is inherently a very, very weak, dysfunctional governance environment in Karamoja, and what our programming can do to begin to create more of a dialogue between citizens, government, services, also strengthening a sense of responsibility and accountability on both sides of the equation, because as you know, and I think as is laid out very frankly in the CSI, Karamoja has a long and checkered history of assistance, and a lot of it is handouts, just handouts, and there are expectations and there's a mentality that comes with that is going to be challenging. It's a challenging environment. So governance is certainly front and center. The other, I'm making 3 points. The second point, I think, is the focus on youth. Uganda as a whole has really taken account of the youth demographic and the bulge that is occurring in Uganda. And actually, if Uganda is a little bit terrifying in the sense that its fertility rates are remaining very high, even as parts of the society have gone through an education transformation and even an economic transformation. Fertility rates are still significant. In Karamoja, this has all sorts of spillover effects, but one of it is that without sort of ensuring that youth are engaged and youth are active participants, we're not going to crack any nuts up there. It is about youth. So that's a second real focus. It sort of reaches back into the strategy, but maybe one of our first procurements that is asking you to help us really think about this issue. The last point I guess I wanted to make, second to last point I really wanted to make about the Karamoja procurement and our strategy is the idea of sustainable approaches to behavior change and what that means. We have a long and checkered history with trying to tackle some of the big nutrition challenges that are out there. And I wouldn't say that we've gotten it right in terms of sustainability after our programs close and we leave. So asking one more time, asking ourselves and asking you guys to really think through, and this is partially part of Arif's world, in your theories of change, what is sustainable change? And I know we have separated these discussions, sustainability and theories of change, but in my mind, these things have to be seen as hand in glove, part and parcel with the same thing. So finally, it kind of links back to the youth issue, but livelihood transformation, recognizing that not everyone in Karamoja is going to be able to be a herder. They're not going to be able to work their way out of poverty relying on former livelihoods. There will be too many people, too many animals. We've got to come up with other non-agriculture-based and non-livestock-based livelihoods. And I believe the CSI gives you the space to really explore in that area. At the same time, thinking about markets and thinking about what's sustainable and where sustainable demand is going to exist. So not everyone can do beekeeping, you know, not everyone can do basket weaving. I know you guys know this, you know the challenges, but that's probably the last big piece. On the other hand, in our other CSI, the graduation model, as I said, it's a little bit more structured than what we have done before. Still, in terms of the reach back into the strategy, governance, and systems, really looking at this in terms of linking people to systems, linking people to services, and helping to strengthen those things through the implementation of the program. And the other one that I'm hoping the other piece I'm hoping we really begin to think about in both of these is the idea of social cohesion and social coherence. So here you are working in communities where you've got refugees and non-refugees side by side. Is there something that can be created that's bigger by leveraging that somehow? I think I will stop there. I don't know that we're going to need a deep dive into the sustainability issue. I've beaten you over the head already with it. I do want to refer you, again, there are resources that are cited in the RFA and in both CSIs. They talk about the sustainability study that Tufts and Fanta did. I would also say take a look at FAFSA 2. That's a document that has a lot of good ideas and certainly a lot of discussion about what hasn't been sustainable. But as you're designing and as you're designing your theory of change, as you're thinking about your programs, think about the motivations, the resources, the capacities, the linkages. What has to be in place when you guys back out of the room and shoot out the lights? What is going to be in place that is going to make you not necessary? I mean, I know that's, I'm not talking about asking you to work yourselves out of a job or any of that, but what you are trying to do is achieve transformation in these communities, and that's the transformation of systems as well as individual households, individual livelihoods. So whether you think the study was well done or not, the sustainability exit strategy study, I think all of us sort of can wrap our minds around the idea of motivation, resources, capacities, and linkages. And we're going to be looking for that in the RFAs, and we'll let you know if we don't believe we're seeing it. So with that, I'm going to turn to Carla, who's going to talk a little bit about gender.
Yeah, I'm kind of going to go over the same thing I always say. It's kind of like a broken record, but at my age, I'm very happy when I do my broken records since I don't really have a memory anymore. So I see that as a successful thing. Anyway, and then I'd like to say, because I've done a lot of work when I was a consultant in Uganda, and I want to say a couple of points maybe about that. First, gender's critical, okay? And what I always say, FFP is serious. And we're not just insisting it's taken into account in our programming because it's the right thing to do, nor that it's USAID policy, but that gender has a direct impact on each piece of food security, food availability, food access, and food utilization. And if you're not addressing it, if you're not dealing with it effectively, you're not going to move along your theory of change to get to where you want to go, okay? I just want to say also, Judy Kaniwati, who just retired, recognized this almost a decade ago and started this in the gender focus in USAID, in Food for Peace before USAID even took it on as a policy. So hats off, Judy. 2 risks. If you do not address, if we do not, I see that we are as a team, if we do not address gender effectively, we're not going to get to up the theory of change. On the other side of it is you're not bringing in what women, men, boys, and girls can add to food security, okay? There's a lot there that they can do, and we're just losing that if we're not effectively bringing them in. What we're looking for in the proposals is we're asking that it be woven throughout the program sections of the proposal. That means more than just we're going to have involve women are going to come with men. No, we want to show, you don't have to do it. I mean, I've been on your side. I've written those proposals. I know how hard it is. Just come across with that we see that you're looking at your theories of change with a gender lens and your thinking, okay? We want to see that throughout the proposal. That doesn't mean you have to have 102 she's in it or something like that. But just that you're thinking. And I know very well, we know very well that this is not easy, okay? Let me make one of my Uganda points here. Uganda jumped onto the gender wagon, hook, line, and sinker. They jump on this stuff, okay? And they did gender budgeting everywhere. They did They have rules where women have to bring their men into maternal child health sessions. You know, they have all these policies there, but they're really not watching what's happening with those policies. Many of you have also heard me, some in northern Uganda, some women, because let's face it, women, not all men are so agreeable and will come into maternal child health sessions, okay? So some women, poor women, because they get better, women who come in with their husbands get better treatment. We're getting better treatment. This was about 2005, but somebody who just came in said it's still the case. We're getting better treatment because they came in with their husbands. They got to go to the front of the line, and the women who didn't come in with their husbands were yelled at, okay? So what are some women doing? They're paying taxi drivers to go in and act as their husbands. Okay, so let's put in these policies, and let's watch what's happening, okay? And Uganda is one of the best, one of the worst, from my experience as a consultant for many years. So let's watch what happens with it. Okay, also, women's time and energy. Okay, who's a mom here? Who is someone who's taking care of an older parent? How is that going with your job? Tough, huh? So let's look at women, and it's most often in the countries where we're working, it's women who have those responsibilities, so the care for the elderly and the care for the children, and it is not easy, okay? So when we come up with our strategies, okay, yes, let's try to do time, look at include strategies that help with women saving time, but let's also look at what our programs are asking women to do, all right? Don't ask women to come to 72 meetings, okay? So or if you do, make sure there's something that is looking for it, or that you're somehow accommodating for that in your program. Women's time and energy is critical. I could go on and on. I could tell you all sorts of personal stories about it. And that's, anyway. Also, let's look at, when we talk about gender, let's look at gender and age, okay? The life of a 15-year-old married girl and her decision-making capacity is very different than, for example, a woman her husband is gone and she runs her own family, okay? And let's also look in this Fanta who provides us technical assistance, often says, can't be my phone, also says, okay, we do all of our MCH activities with young women. We do most of our ag livelihood activities with older women. Let's try to look at that, okay? Also look at boys, young men. Sometimes they're as left out as the young women, okay? Okay, so interplay of gender and age. I'd like you to look at, we must look at and consider this in your proposals, how the things that we do, giving money to women, giving whatever to women, how does that affect the relations between women and men within the household and within the community? And how does that affect their respective access to and control over resources, okay? With that comes on, what is the potential for gender-based violence? And we are proposing some of these changes in roles, responsibilities between men and women. And what are we going? How are you going to watch out for that? And what are you going to do to minimize that risk? Okay. Also, we always talk about this, but how the proposed activities will be carried out in a way that allows equitable participation of women and men of different ages and different social groups. There's a lot of variation in communities. Susan mentioned the refugees and the non-refugees, but there are also other variations also. And so it's not just men, women, boys and girls, but there's a plus factor to that, okay? Okay, and once again, I just wanted to say any possible negative effects on the activities might have on women's time and energy. coming out of being a really active mom. It's hard. Okay, I'm not going to say a lot on youth. Susan talked about youth. It's really important. You know, in some of our countries, I don't know what it is in Uganda. Sorry, I haven't looked at that, but it's 60, 65% in some of our countries. USAID defines youth as 10 through 29, and I don't think that's come out published yet, but they're breaking that down, so we consider that because obviously a life of a 10-year-old is very different than a 29-year-old. They're breaking that down in terms of 10, 15, 19, something like that. So I'll make sure that you have that information. I don't think it's been published out, but it's coming. A lot of times, you know, when people talk about youth, they talk about youth as the parents of tomorrow. Well, many of them are the parents of today. And also, the youth are the everything of tomorrow. And I might say they're also the everything of today. So if we're going to move these communities where they need to go, where everybody thinks, where they want to be, then we're going to have to be dealing major with that youth component within it. Okay. The last thing I want to do is, a lot of times we say, okay, we're going to get the youth to do this, or we have messages for youth. I don't think it should be about messages for youth. I think it should be bringing youth together and deciding what needs to be done. I think that, you know, youth all over the world. I mean, I'm a mom of a 22-year-old and a 24-year-old, and they're trying to figure out what they can do in life and how they can contribute to life. And it's not easy, and it's a heck of a lot easier for my kids than the kids we're dealing with overseas, and they're just looking for a way sort of to make it, have a life. And I think we should be trying to facilitate that and not telling them what to do. Anyway, final to last point. Last point. Okay, I have competing last points. It's the same sustainability thing that Susan talked about. One of them is, what are we doing? I have 1 minute. What are we doing to make sure that the partners, the people we work with in the country, it might be the Ministry of Local Affairs, it might be the Ministry of Ag, it might be the Ministry of Health, that they're on board with us in terms of our gender and youth thing. And that needs to start from day one. In the new countries, we're doing gender consultations, and we're asking you to bring in some of those people to the gender consultation. Second point, when we're talking about youth, what we should really be focusing on is intergenerational communication. How do we increase dialogue and action between generations? And that's what builds strong communities. I made it.
Okay. I think we're going to jump to the theory of change. Sustainability has been part of the whole discussion up until now. So, Arif, why don't you just hop in?
Thank you. Thank you, Susan. So, with regards to the, should I stand up? I have already a very strong voice.
You have a strong voice.
Whatever you're comfortable doing, it just seems like it would be helpful.
Would it be better if it's closer to this?
Yeah.
No, just speaking loudly is fine too.
Okay.
No.
Thank you. So with regards to the theory of change, you know, as a community, we came a long way. In the past 3 years, there has been tremendous improvement in the theory of change diagram that we get to see that are developed by all of you. So I'm going to highlight a few things that probably we still need to be focusing on, and we should be looking for when we review the proposals of the theory of change. One is that, like the theory of, we need to make sure that the theory of change doesn't only include the activities and outcomes that are within our immediate scope of work and within our manageable interest. So it should include all the other necessary and sufficient conditions that needs to happen in order to get to the goal. So that's something that we will be looking for. It has to be evidence-based. We did this in this RFA, we did try to provide some resources that may or may not be applicable as you develop your theory of change, but your research doesn't have to be limited to only on those resources. We just provided some resources so that you can find them in your fingertips. But please make sure that the theory that we built in is based on solid evidence base. There has to be, as Susan and Carla both mentioned about, that the sustainability has to be built into the theory of change. Sustainability cannot be an assumption. So as an Food for Peace, as an agency, we very much bought into the sustainability study that was done by Tufts and Fanta. So there has to be activities in order to improve motivation. There has to be activities to create demand. There has to be activities to create accessibility to resources after the project ends. There has to be activities that will help the individuals as well as the service providers to link with the broader system. And we will be looking for those as we review your theory of change. So please make sure that the sustainability in every sphere are built into the theory of change. And then lastly, I would say that the narrative, we need to, we will be, I think that's one of the areas that needs much improvement yet, where we like to see how, I think if you pay attention to the recently released Food for Peace M&E and reporting policy and guidance, where we try to explain what needs to be, what we like to see in the narrative. Again, this is not universal, this is not standardized, but that's what in Food for Peace we are after. That's what we, within Food for Peace, we like to see in the attached narrative. So that's all what I wanted to talk about theory of change. Thank you.
Okay, I think it's time to move into questions from the PBS community. Just a reminder that the purpose is to clarify the RFA and the CSI, that they will not be, the Food for Peace team will not be answering any procurement sensitive questions. Lauren?
We have a couple questions from online, but Amelia Kendall from World Vision asked about the graduation CSI issue. Are they only allowed to put proposals for both CSIs, or is it only one? Or are organizations allowed to put in proposals for both CSIs, or are they only allowed to put in for one? So could you bid on both?
Yeah.
Yeah. Any more? I can keep going. Can you please explain more about what you mean by peeling back? It was not clear to me how you intended the pilot to run and what we are to propose as an organization for the two core hopes of graduate approaches.
So the graduation model has traditional interventions, and they're traditionally quite costly. So one angle we're looking at is to see how the graduation approach can become less costly. So in peeling back, it's saying you're proposing, we're not going to do this aspect of the graduation approach, but we'll do these others. Or we're not going to do these two aspects of the approach, but we'll do these others. So that's what we're looking for. That's what I meant when I said peeling back the approach.
So scaling back.
Streamlining, something like that? Okay. I was curious about the peeling back terminology myself.
Do you want to add to that, David, or?
Get close to the mic.
Yeah.
Would you please introduce yourself?
I'm David Kelp with Food for Peace. So this is an approach that has been tested rigorously and independently and replicated and tested rigorously and independently in a bunch of places with peer-reviewed publications and the like. And it's clear that it has had impact on moving people out of extreme poverty, and it's increasingly clear that that impact is sustainable over time. But it is, as Grace Anna said, costly. The cost per beneficiary is relatively high. So we're interested in finding ways, if possible, to reduce those costs. And so we're envisioning a comparative analysis where one arm of this research would be the complete graduation approach fully implemented. And then we're open to alternative approaches which would thoughtfully look for ways to reduce the cost per beneficiary. And I think we leave it to you to work that out. But some portions of the approach have proven to be comparatively costly. There's certain cost centers that are baked into it. And there may be ways to, stripping it out may involve eliminating some things entirely, but it also may be about including all those elements, but finding cheaper ways to do some of them. So we look forward to ideas, and when we get to the refine and implement stage, we envision sort of working closely with partners about their ideas to try to make this the best investment possible.
So Amelia Kendall from World Vision again has another question. She asked, if we are putting in a proposal for Karamoja, can we include an amended graduation component as World Vision did in Bangladesh, or do you want the graduation approach to be in the pilot only?
Yeah, it's up to each applicant to propose whatever they want for either of the applications. It's the approach that the applicant is proposing to use, so it's up to them. Oh, right. So the graduation approach, as I mentioned earlier, is a prescriptive intervention that we're looking for. So for that CSI, you're following the traditional graduation approach. And like David was mentioning, with more explanation of the peeling back, looking for the cost-effective. Whereas for the Karamoja CSI, it's not prescriptive. While we put in the information about challenges and opportunities we see, as I mentioned before, we are very much encouraging you all to present challenges and opportunities that we missed. Not necessarily addressing all of the challenges and opportunities that are provided in the CSI. However, you do have to include addressing all four of the thematic areas.
In the CSI for the grad pilot, there's not very much reference to nutrition at all. In fact, it's kind of, it seems already pared down. No focus on reducing, preventing stunting and so forth amongst children under 2. And the focus on gender and youth also appears to be very pared down in that pilot. And
you know, it seems like in terms of the objectives for the program, you're mainly focusing on improving livelihood. But my question would be, given that, are there going to be change or differences between an application? So in other words, in terms of the structure and the technical requirements that are listed in the RFA, would they be very different from what you would address when you submit the CSI? Would they be different? And I'm mainly thinking in terms of indicators that you would be looking to address and the focus of the theory of change.
So, do you want, this may be one area where we could consider adding something here. What we have talked about and what we're assuming is that as part of coaching, I mean, coaching is generally covers a wide range of life skills, livelihood preparation, and as part of that, to include one of the pathways, at least, to better nutrition, which is knowledge, right? And understanding of barriers and understanding of impacts of choices that are being made at a household level. But as you rightly point out, that there's no assumption here that there will be a standalone, if you will, nutrition component. That it is supposed to be sort of integrated in the capacity building that's occurring with households. The only other piece of that is that, as you notice too, as it is explained in the CSI, is that there is a consumption smoothing component of the program, and this consumption smoothing is a doorway, if you will, for the kind of communication that one would expect to occur during the coaching. Why is this transfer? Why is this transfer necessary? What role is it playing in the household? I don't know if you want to add anything, Grace-Anna.
I can just talk about the indicators. You know, like the indicators will depend on what finally the CSI and RFA, the CSI looks like, and what we see in your proposal. So it doesn't necessarily, for this pilot, it doesn't necessarily have to be exactly the same set of indicators that Food for Peace traditionally uses in its development program. We are open to indicators based on what is being proposed.
I just have to play devil's advocate as a gender youth person. I think that it's not to be graduated sustainability unless you are in, you know, addressing gender and youth and building that intergenerational and gender communication and dialogue and action and decision-making in households. So maybe if it's not written in there, if you're going to sustain anything, that's going to have to happen, I would say.
I also just, I'm Vincent Summers from Food for Peace and the Resilience Advisor, and just to add a little to what Carla said, there's actually literature written on the graduation approach and its impact on nutrition, and a study released by CGAP in July shows that there are positive benefits to many of the traditional indicators that you mentioned Food for Peace works on. So I think there's scope for that.
But we can strengthen these discussions in this document. And thanks for pointing it out, Mara.
Suzanne Berkey with SAVE. Just to clarify in terms of the variations, is that limited to variations with regard to sort of the graduation model, or could it also be add-ons or complementary? I think we talk about peeling back, we recognize how extensive the model can be, but could some of the variations maybe be an add-on, or are you really just looking at the scaled back model?
The intent was really scaling back rather than adding on.
Can I keep going?
Yes, you can.
Suzanne, could you speak a little bit louder?
Oh, sorry, I thought I was loud. You had mentioned working closely with partners to conduct the RCTs. Will that be with separate funding then, or should proposals incorporate that into their budget? And also, will there be an expected midterm evaluation as part of the grad program?
The randomized control trials will be separately funded, so not a part of this. We do expect partners to incorporate learning into the budget, and the midterm will be, they'll be used based on the randomized control trial research, will be used as part of the midterm. So not.
So, yeah, so just, so the baseline for that particular pilot will be integrated with the impact evaluation that, the research arm will be doing. So we don't anticipate, again, we don't know right now until we see the proposal, but at this point of time, we do not anticipate a completely separate baseline. We are hoping that we would be able to integrate the baseline with the research, because they will be doing a baseline as well for the research, for the impact evaluation.
Just to follow on that, so the standard indicators, data on the standard indicators, particularly the impact indicators, will be gathered by the implementer or by the research institute?
By the research institute, not by the...
Just wanted to be clear.
Yeah.
So that there might be two baselines, one, the institute's baseline reflects its approach and those indicators, and then a baseline of other data, that are of interest to the implementer?
If the implementer would like to collect more information, for their own monitoring, and if they need a baseline, that could be something that definitely, like any other development project, that option is there. But the independent baseline that Food for Peace has been doing, that will be integrated. Our intention is to that piece will be integrated with the research baseline that will be done by the contractor, or the research arm. Yeah, please.
So following up on the last question about the midterm, so the vision here is evidence-based adaptive management, building on the graduation approach. So the idea is, first year, we identify extremely poor folks, engage them, and then enroll those who are interested in participating. So it's careful targeting focused on the extremely poor. And then roll out the project in two separate phases, two distinct cohorts. Each cohort will receive a treatment of 30 months. So the first cohort then would do randomized selection of this entire population, divide them in two. So the first folks, cohort 1 will be half of that target population. Cohort 2 will not be treated until later in the project, and they will be then a control group during the first phase. And the idea is to do all the arms of the research during this first phase, and then evaluate and then analyze the data. So there will be a potent midterm based on this RCT, and the results of that should inform a redesign happening halfway through the project, so that the second cohort will receive. It may look very different than what happened in the first. The idea would be to invest in those things that have been proven to be vigorous, impactful, impactful during that first phase.
And that's all within 6 months?
The evaluation.
The sort of the first RCT, midterm redesign, working with Food for Peace. I mean, that's sort of the timeline, right?
We've got, as I recall, a year of refine, a 30-month cohort 1 implementation, a midterm, I don't recall.
For 6 months. The data collection will be happening towards the end. It's not going to happen at the 30-month period. It's going to happen a little bit before. So then you have the time, the researchers have the time to start analyzing the data for implementation. We recognize that researchers might want this opportunity for broader learning throughout the community. So they'll still be providing the information to the awardee for implementation adjustments. It's not going to, let's wait for the research to be finalized. It's what can we do now?
We have a couple questions online. Nafis asked, should we anticipate the proposal submission deadlines for both CSIs to be on or around the same date? Or will they be somewhat staggered?
Repeat the question.
Will the proposal deadlines be around the same date?
Not known at this time.
Yes.
This is Lori. Just a quick reminder, we have over 30 people online. So if you could just very briefly say, this is Arif, or this is Graciana, or Hap, or Suzanne before you speak, it'll make that community feel a little more included. And the level of speaking that Arif and Susan have been using is a great meter for speaking up so that we're sure that they can hear us.
Go ahead.
Hi, this is Julie from Food for Peace. I'm a plant, and I would like to know your thoughts on extra annexes and extra text with the applications that are being submitted. I'd specifically like to know whether or not all my extra annexes will be reviewed when they are exorbitant and excessive in length. I'm hoping to really fill out my 45 pages with extra stuff and extra annexes.
So I would note that that is something that is very clearly addressed in the RFA, and I would encourage you to read the document. Perhaps Beth could give you the page number citation.
Yes, on page 22, we listed, we this year added a description of each required annex. So each required annex, so you know exactly what we're asking for in that particular annex. And as it now stands, which this is a draft, any annexes beyond the 17 that are required do not replace the 17 that are required. So it will be considered supplemental information, any extra annexes that you submit. I'm a plant too. Can I even further expound upon that?
And I'm very loud, and I'm going to stand right under a microphone. This is Lara Evans in the Office of Food for Peace as well. And just to say, I mean, there are mandatory sections of the RFA, and you have to put the information within those sections. If you would like to use the annex to supplement that information, that's perfectly okay. It cannot replace it. You cannot put your M&E plan elsewhere. You cannot put your mandatory whatever in an annex. Just going to say that to you because we got tons and tons of annexes last time with like 50 to 100 pages. So it's not going to be read.
Can I just say, this is Carla, and I've been on your side of the table for most of my career, and I want to say reading the period that we had to do to read all this stuff was one of the hardest things I've done in my whole career. So, because I had every intention to try to read and understand and pull together, but it was overwhelming. So just don't think that over here, it's also hard, okay, on this side of the table. So.
So this is Mara Russell from CARE again. I want to thank you sincerely for making the annex, making the M&E plan and the learning plan, applied learning plan, whatever that was, to be annexes and not part of the text, because that creates more space for other things in the text, and it allows for the M&E plan and the learning plan to take up the space they need in the annexes. The question that I have, however, is for the theory of change narrative, which can be a rather long document. I just completed one for a project after a theory of change review, which was about 45 pages in length. The question that I have is how much of a theory of change narrative is required as part of the proposal, the main proposal body, and will a full theory of change diagram be accepted as an annex in a different format, whatever that might be, PowerPoint, Excel, etc.?
We will, thank you for the question or suggestion, and we will definitely review that. We are not anticipating a 45-page long narrative, but if that is, that is the, I don't know, so we need to review that, and in the final, as we finalize the guidance, we will think about it.
John Jennings as an individual who will probably be consulting soon. In the narrative, there are not super specific time frames given for different activities. So my question is, how indicative is this graphic?
This is for the graduation model, Joan?
This is the graduation pilot, yes, thank you. It does mention like consumption smoothing throughout. It does say savings as early as possible. It doesn't say much about asset transfer, so it caught my attention where so did this graphic come from the original model, or is it just mildly indicative, or I guess that's the question.
It's moderately indicative. There's flexibility. The model has been replicated in a lot of places, and there's been some variation across those. The sequence is important. So consumption smoothing starts early. Savings starts early. Coaching starts early. Follow-on trainings and the asset transfer, let's say there's flexibility. Explain what you propose and why.
Hi there. I'm Douglas Carey from NCBA Clusa. Can you give any more details on the rough timeline for finalizing some of the documentation that you've spoken about today? It's also referenced in the CSI. There's some very important things that need to be finalized before this is all then finalized and released. Is any more granularity, detail on timing, sequencing of events would help for work planning purposes? Thanks.
I believe that's the same answer as early. We recognize the importance of getting these finalized as soon as possible, but at this point we can't give any more detail on that. But it will be very clear when they are finalized, and it will be announced to all via the normal methods, such as grant funding.
Thanks.
Suzanne with SAVE again. In the main RFA document, it makes reference that resources may be used for emergency purposes pursuant to regulations. Is this also anticipated for the graduation program, given the research orientation of that separate award?
I think we need to clarify that in the RFA. The regulation that's cited is 22 CFR 211. That applies to Title II funds. So we can elaborate on what to do with CDF money.
The graduation is
Title II,
yeah. So it's
the same answer. So we can look at what will happen with the graduation.
Thank you.
Okay, so this is from Abby Johnson, a gender consultant, and the question is, so this is for Carla on gender. The question is, the draft RFA refers to a gender concept note. and not a gender analysis plan this year. This description seems similar to what is referred to in the past as the gender analysis plan. And then can USAID confirm that this is substantively the same thing, and the change in wording is purely semantic?
There's an overlap, but it's not purely semantic. We're studying basically what were just scopes of work, and pretty much boilerplate, what is the scope of work of the gender analysis. What we're looking for is more out of that. Well, there will be some aspects of describing what the gender analysis is in that annex. There's also, we're asking for, I didn't bring the specifics, but it's in the tech chap and technical chapter, gender technical chapter. There's only about 2-page description there. And we're asking more, identifying, one of the things we're identifying along the theory of change, where some of the key gender hot points are along the theory of change. So it's a little bit different. It is not just a word change. I tried to make it more meaty, because what we were getting was basically just boilerplate gender 101 scopes of work. Let me say on top of that also, I think we're looking for gender analysis that are more of a gender lens on the theories of change, rather than the traditional, what do men do in the country, what do women do. We want a focus in with a gender lens on the theory of change, and not just, who grows beans.
So if there isn't a reference already in the RFA to the technical reference chapters or gender, all right, so if the reference is there, please, when we refer to those, it's really important that you take a look.
We have also one more online. This is Hannah Dooch, and she says, question, the draft RFA does not include any definition of vulnerable populations other than children under 5 years old and women, and in particular, no mention of persons with disabilities who are more likely to experience poverty. Does USAID Food for Peace see disabled persons and persons with disabled members as included in vulnerable populations in the RFA?
Well, certainly the Food for Peace strategy makes clear that there's a vulnerability includes a wide range of inequities and challenges. So the answer would be yes, I think.
And just to add that this is another example that the RFA should not be read as an independent document. Always link back to the strategy.
The other item is, this is Julie, Food for Peace. The award itself for successful applicants, the award also has standard provisions, mandatory standard provision linked to persons with disabilities. And so USAID has to operate accordingly. And so that's another thing to keep in mind.
Can I respond to Mara's earlier question about the theory of change narrative? I would just say, Mara, the narrative has to capture what are the causal linkages. We don't need a dissertation in the actual RFA, but we need to understand a basic walkthrough of what's happening and understanding the causal relationships there. So I think that's, and if we are able to discern from what you present what you're talking about, we will refer to your further attachment if we have questions about it. But we have to understand what it is that you're presenting.
Okay, are you interested, just to clarify, are you also interested in things like linkages and assumptions? But you don't want real, in-depth detail in every single aspect. You just want to look at how the causes lead to what solutions you're looking at to address the causes of food, nutrition insecurity, and so forth, that kind of thing.
I think that's fair, but we will, as Arif said, we'll look at it, and if there's further explanation, we'll make sure that it's clear.
Yeah, what should be included in the narrative is clearly articulated in the Food for Peace M&E and reporting policy and guidance. So that discusses, what is expected in the narrative.
Right.
Now, whether the narrative would be included or not, we will.
To what extent it should be included.
And what extent that we will revisit. We took note of your comment, and we will revisit that as we revise.
Oh,
I'll
thank
keep
you.
going.
Goodness.
Well, actually, I guess one general question. I assume that organizations will be, this is Suzanne again. Organizations will be submitting additional questions after, or have the opportunity after this discussion. So will those all questions and responses be made available to everyone as part of the final RFA, or they'll just simply be incorporated into the final RFA?
They will be incorporated into the final RFA. They will be considered carefully, and they will be incorporated as needed into the final RFA, which will be shared with everybody, as has been done in previous years.
And then just within the CSI for the Karamoja area, there's mention of WFP's scope MIS system, and I didn't know whether additional information would be provided on that, because it sounds like it may be utilized or it may not, and would it be just for the Karamoja region or for both awards?
WFP's piloting scope currently in Karamoja, so it's a pilot, so it's unclear what it will look like by the time this award will be in place. We want applicants to be aware that it's being piloted, and it would be expected to be used in Karamoja specifically. It's unclear what WFP's beneficiary system will look like for in other areas of the country, because right now they're only piloting it in Karamoja.
Suzanne, this is Susan. Suzanne, are you looking for greater clarity on our expectations of partners in regards to scope?
Well, I guess I was wondering perhaps, if a presentation might be provided to all potential applicants at once so that it can be seen what is the current status of it, get a sense of when it might be available, because that would have budgetary and staffing, potential staffing implications, just to get a better sense of what might be available and when. Sorry, I feel like I'm screaming now.
It's a great level. Okay, I think we heard you. I'm not quite sure that we have a vision of how exactly to address that at this time. Certainly, if we have any more information about scope and its extent and what potential roles could be that we can include in the final RFA, CSI, we certainly will do that.
This is Joan Jennings. Maybe a similar question and maybe more work than you guys can take on. Coming from the development community, one of my first questions for the graduation pilot is, I don't know what emergency services exist, will continue to exist, and so I am running around trying to get myself up to speed on that, and I'm wondering if there's any broader information that could be shared with the community. I guess particularly thinking towards the future, as Suzanne said.
Do you want a couple of things, and then maybe Graciana or Soledad, you can jump in. I do think that the information, the background information provided in the desktop study that helps unpack vulnerabilities and challenges of specific regions will help. This is not an area of although it certainly has received emergency resources for refugee assistance, it is not a highly it has not received significant emergency resources for example, environmental challenges. I'm not sure when you're talking about emergency services, but I will refer you guys to the background information that is provided in the desktop study, also in the document itself.
Not out yet. Yeah, it's not out yet.
Yeah, Fanta's desk review will be completed and published prior, or if not prior to the release of the RFA, at the time of the RFA, which will have more of the background that you're looking for.
I have another question regarding the RFA. So, as part of the evaluation criteria and so forth for these programs, in general, you say that there are certain targets for some of the highest level impact indicators, stunting, underweight, and I think it's, depth of poverty, that, you have a certain level of expectation and so forth, and that is presented in percentage points per year. And this year, there's a footnote that says this should be based on the length of an average 5-year program. But none of these programs are ever implemented for a total of 5 years because there's a startup period, and then the final evaluation is usually done before the end of the project. So, and the baseline is done a few months in as well. The question I have is, do you expect for the targets to be based on 5 years, or should they be based on some period like 4 years, or whatever would be realistic based on the total time of anticipated time of implementation?
Excuse me, this is Arif from Food for Peace. We like to have the target based on 5 years because many projects get extended. We acknowledge that typically in a typical life of a 5-year project, we measure probably 3.5 years of investment. So if the project ends really at the end of 5 years, we will take that into account, that what is possible in 3.5 years, but also there are many projects get extended beyond 5 years. So in those cases probably, so, either way, it is easier for us to understand, what you are up for, and then we will take into account the length of the investment.
Okay, because actually you will be putting in a 5-year project with a 5-year budget and 5-year implementation plan, which may not go, for 60 months total in terms of actual implementation. But if you're willing to be flexible about that, that's great.
Yeah, you can put in the parentheses that, this is because in order to come up with an annual, figure, because again, when we put annually, then some people raise a question that, well, how do you come up with an annual target for stunting, which is a longer term effect anyway. Okay. So you can put in parentheses that expected annual change is this.
I'm Nathan Fauzi with ACDI Boca. With the increased emphasis on strategic objective 2 and looking at the transformation of institutions, are there possibilities of directly partnering with them if they are within the government of Uganda through the project, with project resources?
Do you want to talk about it from a grant perspective? Or?
I think that's something we could clarify from a grants perspective. There are certain rules and regulations about partnering with government institutions, and so that would need to be taken into account. That was something from the programmatic side. That's something.
Well, the CSI does talk about building the capacity of local institutions, and that's and that includes government institutions, but we need to clarify sort of from an ABS perspective what can and can't, or we can at least send you to the proper guidelines for that.
Right, and the ADS now talks about, I believe, some awards with government institutions, so we can clarify it.
Yeah. But I appreciate the question because it is an important one. It does it's emphasized very strongly in the Karamoja CSI and as well actually as the graduation model. We do expect partnerships, strong partnerships, to be being made with local institutions.
I can give my high school nickname and pretend to be.
Or maybe just change your voice and come up with a different name, you know.
Speaking Cape Verde Creole. Just a question. The graduation CSI references another solicitation. And without getting into the specifics of that, I was just wondering if information will be provided prior to the, I guess, during this proposal season, as to maybe the size, the population size that would be needed for that, or sort of any parameters around it that might help any applicants sort of think through the graduation beneficiary base. I hope that makes sense.
I don't know. Another solicitation.
It's for the research.
Oh. Have we all understood the question? Because I know I haven't.
Okay.
I think I have, and I think this is about, and clarify if I'm wrong, kind of what's the minimum number of beneficiaries we need in order to have a robust research design given the various arms?
Right, right.
Okay. So what's the N that we need, and then?
Which I think would be worked through during the refinement phase.
But it affects budget.
It does.
Okay, we will take that under advisement and try to come up with something.
Thank you. Anything else?
She's starting with me with duct tape back here.
Speak now, forever hold your peace. Speak now or submit comments via the FY17. But you won't get a response.
Yes,
So.
but it will be considered.
Jonathan White with NCDA CLUSA. I was just wondering how you see the sequencing of your timeline for the presentation that we're talking about, plus the ones that are on the research presentations and sort of sequencing timing. So, I mean, presumably the idea would be that we'd be moving in tandem so we can get some coordination with those research partners to get that, as you were saying earlier, sort of the baseline. That we didn't talk about the timeline on research partners. Is that the vision, I'm assuming?
Yes, that is the vision. It's absolutely critical that the timing moves kind of in tandem.
Anything else online? All right. Thank you very much. Appreciate your time.
Yeah,
Attendance
thank
on a
you.
cold day.
How you guys missed it?